Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. Oh my god, it's been a while since our last unit builder. Pretty sure the last one we did was for Valentine's Silk, which was definitely about a month ago. But even longer than that, it's been 6 months since our last 3 Houses banner. Finally! This banner's been so highly anticipated, and though none of my personal favorites are on this banner, I definitely look forward to summoning on my alternate account later this week. Anyway, for today's unit builder, I wanted to talk about the instant demote to this banner, the most noble of them all, the one and only Ferdinand von AEGIR. He's made his debut into Fire Emblem Heroes as a cavalry lance unit, which does not surprise me one bit, but what does surprise me are his stats. Let's take a look at them. At 5 stars, level 40, Ferdinand's neutral stats read as HP 41, attack 32, speed 35, defense 30, and res 24. Yikes. I know that cavalry units tend to get a little shafted when it comes to base stats, but wow, his attack is very low. It's kind of shocking, to be honest. Unsurprisingly, he's got some fairly modest speed. 35 is pretty decent for cavalry standards, although admittedly, it's kind of laughable when you look at all the fast infantry units that we've been getting over the past few months. Now, as for his defense, I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting this to be higher too. 30 defense is salvageable, but it's really sad when you consider that Valentine's Silk has a higher defense stat of 32, and she's a cavalry healer. And while this shouldn't come as a surprise to any of you, Ferdinand's resistance isn't great either. He's got a super boon in res, which can bring his base resistance up from 24 to 28, which is better. But unless you're trying to go for a mixed bulk build, I'm not sure. It's salvageable, but not without some investment, that's for sure. 24 res is not impressive, especially now that we're literally getting mages with 41 base attack. Ooh. As for his skills, Ferdinand comes with Vanguard Plus in his weapon slot. It's certainly not a new weapon, but it is a handy one. Vanguard has 14 might and offers plus 7 defense on the enemy phase. This definitely helps beef him up, although this only brings him up to 37 defense. 40 if he's got a defense boon, which is fine, but it could be better. On the bright side, he does come with reposition. As for his A slot, Ferdinand comes with Fortress Defense 3, which grants plus 5 defense and minus 3 attack to his base stats. Again, this definitely helps beefing him up, but let me just go ahead and say this right now, I don't like this skill for Ferdinand in particular, because his attack is already so low. You'll see in our first build today that there are other ways of increasing his defense, but without having to hinder his attack, so I'm going to be replacing this skill fairly quickly. The last thing we want is for Ferdinand von AEGIR to be hitting like a wet noodle. Now, on the bright side, they did at least give Ferdinand a new C skill, Rouse, Speed, and Defense. It's because of this skill that many of us suspected Ferdinand to be a speedy tank of some kind, which admittedly is kind of an odd niche to begin with. Still, despite my salt, let's do our best to play to his strengths and craft some builds for him. Okay, so I've got 2 builds today for Mr. von AEGIR. The first build is perhaps the most budget flexible of the 2, and that would be the enemy phase tank build. Now, this build isn't original by any means, it's directly inspired from the build I currently run on my Silas, but it's fairly flexible and easy to whip up with some free-to-play friendly units. This build is largely based around Ferdinand's base weapon, Vanguard Plus. For this build, I'm going to strongly recommend the use of both a boon in defense as well as a defense refine on his weapon. For his assist, Ferdinand already comes with reposition, so we're gonna keep that. However, it's worth mentioning that it's especially important for any enemy phase tank unit to have reposition, as it allows them to move their squishier allies out of the way so that they can do what they do best, tanking. Now for his special, we're going to employ Bonfire. It's got a cooldown cost of 3, which is modest, and scales its damage boost off of the unit's defense, which is exactly what we're trying to pile up on this build. Now for his A slot, I'm going to have to go with Steady Stance 3 or 4, depending on what you have lying around. Steady Stance 4 is of course the preferred tier, as it'll give him an extra 2 points in his defense, and also slow the enemy from building their special. I know that Surtur was recently on a stance skills banner, so if any of you managed to catch one, Ferdinand is a great unit to pass that A skill onto. On a budget, however, you can easily obtain Steady Stance 3 from Silas. Okay, next up, his B slot, we've got Quick Riposte. It's interesting with Ferdinand. As far as his base speed goes, it's kind of middle of the road. He's in a solid enough place to avoid being doubled by a good number of enemies, but I also don't imagine him doubling very many enemies in return either. That's why, for the sake of this build, Quick Riposte is still a great option because 1, it's an enemy phase skill, meaning it already synergizes with the rest of this build, and 2, it ensures that regardless of whether or not he gets doubled, he will always perform a follow-up attack, which is nice. Next up, in his C slot, you can actually keep his native Rouse skill in place. In general, Rouse skills are great because it's so easy for cavalry units to distance themselves from other allies and activate their skill on the next turn. His native Rouse speed and defense certainly works well on a budget and lessens the need for Quick Riposte. However, if I'm being picky, which I often am, I would probably prefer to inherit Rouse attack and defense instead. Thanks to Quick Riposte, there is less of a need for speed in this build, and so Ferdinand would benefit much more from an increase to his attack. I'm also kind of obsessed with the idea of foddering an Edelgard to Ferdinand, which is honestly such a power move. Anyway, lastly for his S slot, I decided to go with Fierce Stance 3, which grants him +6 attack in combat on the enemy phase. Ordinarily, I'd probably prefer to use Steady Stance 3 or even Close Defense 3, which is what I run on my Silas, but thanks to Vanguard, I think we might be in a position where his defense is so solid that his attack is what really needs to be adjusted now. Sturdy Stance is also a great option, by the way, in case you want both a little more defense and attack. Okay, and that's pretty much it for this build. Like I said, this is a pure enemy phase build. It's very straightforward, very to the point, but it's also just very effective, and still fairly affordable for anyone wanting to build Ferdy on a budget. Now for our second build, this one is going to capitalize on Ferdinand's base speed and strive to turn him into an offensive threat. For this build, we are going to want to go with a boon in attack, and for his weapon, I wanted to bring in the Lofty Blossoms Plus. This is a weapon that is exclusively found on Bridal Tanith. I was pity broken by her on a previous summoning session, and though I'm a little annoyed that she's still in my barracks, her weapon is fairly nice. Lofty Blossoms comes with a built-in Swift Sparrow effect, granting +4 to the unit's attack and speed. With an additional speed refine, you can probably tell where we're going with this build. Moving on, we're going to keep Reposition, but for his special, I decided to throw in Glimmer. With this build, he'll definitely have enough attack to make use of Glimmer's damage boost. This slot, though, is of course really flexible, so feel free to toss something else in here if you'd like. Guild Force is another option if you decide to bring in Heavy Blade 3 into his S slot. Anyway, for his A slot, we're gonna throw in Swift Sparrow 3, which grants +6 attack and +7 speed on the player phase. Again, this is another very straightforward build. We're basically stacking stats on top of stats, and hey, it works. For his B slot, I thought it might be fun to throw in Lull Attack and Defense 3, which is a great skill that automatically inflicts -3 attack and defense on the enemy mid-combat. It also, of course, neutralizes any bonuses to those stats on the enemy, so this is a great way to help ensure that Ferdinand is maximizing his damage output while also reducing how much damage he takes from any and all threats. For his C skill, I actually wanted to keep his Rouse speed and defense again. Ferdinand welcomes the increase to his speed, and because he's always going to have to take a hit prior to performing a follow-up attack, this is a great way to start building up a little defense. The same can be applied for his S slot, which is why I chose Sturdy Blow. It grants +4 attack and defense on the player phase. Sure, you could throw in Swift Sparrow again, but with all the speed we've got so far, I think that boosting his defense would be preferred so that he doesn't take as much damage on the initial counterattack. And to give you all a breakdown of how high we're piling these stats, I made a cute little graphic to show you the math. We've got his base stats on the left. Thanks to Lofty Blossom's effect, we're adding attack and speed +4, bringing those respective stats up to 53 and 42. Swift Sparrow 3 adds +6 attack, bringing that up to 59, and +7 speed, bringing that up to 49. Lull Attack and Defense inflicts -3 to the enemy's attack and defense, which can be interpreted as +3 to Ferdinand's attack, defense, and resistance. So those stats come up. Rouse Speed and Defense 3 grants +6 speed and defense if it activates, which, if it does, brings his speed up to 55 and his defense up to 39. And lastly, thanks to Sturdy Blow, his attack comes up to 66 and his defense 43 on the player phase. With 55 speed, Ferdinand should be doing a lot of work, so I think this should work very well for him. Before we finish up here, I just wanted to mention that if you don't have a spare Tanith lying around, because why would you? This build also works very well on a Fire Sweep Lance. Fire Sweep weapons for any new players prevent the foe from counterattacking on the player phase, but also prevent you from counterattacking on the enemy phase. Fire Sweep builds are typically best for fast units who can effectively double the enemy, which Ferdy should be able to do thanks to this build. You can inherit the lance really easily from a Roderick and just tweak this build to go all in on his attack and speed. Just another fun option that I thought might be worth mentioning. Okay, and that is it for our two builds. They're both very simple and straightforward, but I think that both of them could work really well for Ferdinand given his two strengths. Lastly, here are what his stats look like when fully merged up. His stats look much more promising at plus 10. Thankfully. And because he'll be available in the 4-star summoning pool, I imagine many of you will be trying to merge him up. While my two builds for him are by no means an end-all be-all for Mr. Von AEGIR, I hope this video gives you a good starting point for how to best map out his builds. Anyway, that is it for today, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this. I'm still behind trying to edit and upload all of these videos I've had on backlog for over a month now, but I'm trying my best to get caught up and without falling too far behind. Anyway, thanks again for watching. Happy summoning, everybody. Happy saving, and take care. Bye.